When you think of BMW, and if you're intensely interested in cars like me, it's probably quite often, your immediate thought is probably far from thinking of their top-of-the-line luxury model, their rarely purchased and even more rarely witnessed 760 Li. Your thought is probably, like mine, of a tire-screeching M3 driven by a man as clinically precise as the car is. And whether by design or not, the V12-powered 760 Li, a relatively low-volume car for BMW at less than 5,000 units a year here in the US, rarely gets the press nor admiration it actually deserves. Now, whether that is simply an oversight by the media collective or guided by good reason, I think we're about to find out.
And at this point, you're probably asking yourself, why are we reviewing the BMW 7 Series in the first place? And surely it's a heavy car, you must be asking. And yes, it is. It's 5,000 pounds of trick electronics and aluminum shaped into a twin-turbo V12, the same one actually as in the Rolls-Royce Ghost. And for those of you who are all about statistics and things like that, the buck probably does stop there. But it really shouldn't. Because check this out. Going along at about 4 miles an hour. Plant your foot in sport mode. This thing will do 4.5 seconds, 0 to 60. A massive figure for a 5,000 pound car. Just an insane, insane figure. Something that we couldn't even thought of being possible 10 years ago. Something that, to be honest with you, I'm still having a little bit of trouble getting my mind around here in 2013.
And for those of you intensely interested in the straight numbers of this thing, and we don't really blame you, they're kind of biblical, we'll get that out of the way for you in quick succession. Your 535 some odd horsepower comes from a rollicking great V12, the kind of thing that you would have seen powering a World War II battleship. And if that wasn't enough, a turbo is mounted either side of the engine for even more go fast. BMW's 8-speed automatic transmission attempts to kind of harness all this power into a manageable road-going package. And you can attempt to shift the transmission manually using the gear lever, but to save frustration, we found that you'd be better off just letting the computers kind of do their thing. And I do transpose the horsepower figures of the 760 and the Rolls-Royce Ghost later in the film, so just kind of consider yourself warned. With the BMW, you should be expecting to get about 535, 536 horsepower from a 6-liter V12, and in the Rolls-Royce Ghost, you're going to get 563 horsepower from the same engine, but bored out to 6.6 liters.
So the very first time I saw this car, my very first impression, my very first thought was that, to be honest, it looks a little ungainly. It is a big car. I mean, don't think just by looking at it, and I think this is kind of one of the selling points of this car, is that you don't think it will do the speeds and the performance that this car actually does. I mean, the only thing that will give away kind of the performance that's kind of rumbling underneath the skin, all this luxury, is the two V12 emblems on either side right behind the wheels, and the 760 Li badge on the back, which, let's be honest, unfortunately most people aren't going to know the difference between a 740 and a 760. To them it's just another 7 Series. But what I really want to get back to is just how this car drives. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't do the things that it does, but it does them, and it does them ridiculously well. I mean, the car weighs more than 2-3 moons, and it's longer than the Earth is round. It shouldn't do the things that it does, but it does them, and it doesn't just do them. And here's the catch: it actually does them extremely well, which is something that you don't, just looking at the car from the outside, you're like, oh, it's just a 7 Series, but it really isn't. It's something that's just fantastic. It's a car that's bigger than itself. I mean, I've shot guns that are slower than this thing. I mean, if you put Usain Bolt in this car, in this seat, he would crap himself. Either that or crash it. I've heard that he crashes BMWs. Heard. Sorry, Usain. Driving this thing around, it is a luxury apartment on wheels, a top-of-the-line Manhattan penthouse that will go 155 miles an hour and get you in style doing so. It is a fantastic piece of engineering. I cannot stress that enough. It's an unbelievable achievement. Made by BMW in 2013 with a V12 that produces 535 horsepower and still have a warranty and still have 4 different settings for how comfortable you want to be while you're driving is just mind-boggling. And good news for those of you who are easily bored, because BMW have once again fitted their newest version of the iDrive system. I think they're on version 4 point something now. So besides the swelling acceleration, you've also got the iDrive system, which will, in my calculations, probably keep you occupied for what, a year, possibly 5, trying to figure out.
So yes, we did make the infamous iDrive joke, but in all reality, it's not that bad of a system at all. As long as you take a few minutes to kind of learn the intricacies, you'll be pretty much set for the breadth of your ownership. We just like to amuse the internet trolls every once in a while. Keeps us feeling relevant. And the few qualms I do have with the car, like the instrument cluster being a bit difficult to read at speed, which is easily solved by the magnificent heads-up display, I might add, and the manufacturer's exhaust note pumping through the speakers are all really easily forgot once you put a little bit of pressure on your right foot.
So good news, Europeans. We've got the 760 and 760 Li, according to BMW, are now going to be EU6 emissions compliant, which I have literally no idea what that means. But congratulations, I think? Maybe? But in all seriousness, I mean, it's got everything you could possibly need. It has a night vision camera, for God's sakes. Like, who needs that? I mean, where do we think we live? In the middle of nowhere? Pretty sure no one in the middle of nowhere is going to buy this car. If you live in the middle of Kansas on a farm and you have bought this car, please let me know. I would love to meet you.
Regardless of the fact of whether or not someone in Kansas has actually purchased this car, you still cannot talk endlessly about the 760 without at least acknowledging the existence of its sister car in spirit, the Rolls-Royce Ghost, a car that is actually a lot more similar to the 760 than you originally might believe.
But knowing the Rolls-Royce Ghost uses the same engine as this car, it has relatively similar performance, about the same horsepower figures as well, 536 or so, and 4.50 to 60, same as this car. You've got to ask yourself, why would you actually buy the Rolls-Royce? I don't understand it. I mean, maybe it's a status thing, but even then, if you buy the Rolls-Royce for $250 some odd thousand, what it starts at, you're still going to show up one night to your friend's house, your other rich friend, and they're going to have this. And you're going to be sitting around the dinner table, and then they're going to realize that you just bought the entirely wrong car. Because guess what? He spent $100,000 less than you. Could go buy an Ariel Atom, Radical, whatever, track day toy. And he still has the same horsepower as you. So I don't see the point in buying the Rolls Royce. I just don't. Maybe that's just me because I don't have the actual money to buy either of these cars, but at this point, this car is mega.
And before you start grabbing your pitchforks, we know that the horsepower figures listed in that little piece were slightly off. But let's be honest, 30, 40 horsepower difference in 5,000-pound cars, you're really not going to notice. And while it may seem like on the surface we're saying the Rolls-Royce is actually a terrible car, in reality it actually isn't. In fact, it's a fantastically built and engineered piece of machinery. What it really comes down to is this: is the design of the Rolls-Royce really worth an extra $100,000?
I mean, from the outside, this car is kind of a polarizing look. I think it looks a lot better than the Chris Bangle designs of last generation. Those were, let's be honest, kind of terrible. I mean, when I first saw this car, I actually thought it looked kind of like a Rhino on Adderall, right? I mean, it's a massively bulky car. It looks really muscular and intimidating. This car is built to fly under the radar, right? That's the whole point of it. Otherwise, you would buy the Rolls-Royce. To anyone else that doesn't notice the giant V12 insignias on the side, this is just any other BMW. So it's built to go under the radar so you can outrun anyone with a radar gun. BMW 760 Li. Once you get in here, it's like, wow, this thing is on drugs, man. It just goes. It goes, 500 and plus horsepower and 4.5 to 60. It's a ridiculous car. This shouldn't be legal.